The Tampa Bay Buccaneers did not pick up Joe Tryon-Shoyinka's fifth-year option. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Thursday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at @JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Some of the undrafted free agents that I find interesting coming up in a little bit, but let's start with Joe Tryon-Shoyinka and his fifth-year option not being picked up by the Buccaneers. And this should not come as a surprise to many, but the Bucs declined to pick up the fifth-year option for Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, meaning he's heading into a contract year with the Bucs. And after limited production, to go with the flashes and the promise that he has showed, Jason Licht appears to be sticking to his guns. You go back to around this time last year, and Jason Licht essentially said that this is a make or break year for Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. He did not, in fact, make on that year. So now he's facing a true do or die season, and whether or not he will return to the Buccaneers after the 2024 regular season or playoffs has concluded. And I go back to something that I've talked about on this show a few times, and that was Todd Bowles referring to JTS as one of his chess pieces, and that now he knows how to best utilize Joe Tryon-Shoyinka's strengths. So while intriguing as far as being able to see a potential JTS breakout and find some consistent production, it might be too little too late for Tryon-Shoyinka and his future with the Buccaneers. He was drafted to be an edge rusher and take over for Jason Pierre-Paul, and now his position is kind of up in the air. The Bucs went out, they drafted Chris Braswell this year. They drafted Yaya Diaby last year. They brought in Randy Gregory as a free agent. All of this was to compensate for the fact that there was little to no production from Tryon-Shoyinka and Shaq Barrett in a defense that is predicated on the ability to get in the quarterback's face, disrupt plays, create sacks, create turnovers. Having edge rushers that can't get to the quarterback is a massive, massive problem. And we've seen that trickle down effect to the secondary, where the corners were left on islands for far too long because the pass rush just wasn't getting there. A lot of that had to do with Shaq Barrett not playing up to the level that was expected of him with the Buccaneers. A lot of that had to do with the fact that Joe Tryon-Shoyinka seems to have a ceiling that he has already hit and hasn't been able to get past that. That inability to rush the quarterback from the edges. There's only so much that the interior can do with Vita Vea and Kalijah Kancey and blitzing linebackers and blitzing corners. You have to be able to get after the quarterback with those edge guys in the interior without sending extra people. And instead, the Bucs were having to send 1, 2, sometimes 3 extra guys to try to get pressure on the quarterback. It made Carlton Davis look bad. It made Jamel Dean look bad. It made Zion McCollum look bad. And those guys made themselves look bad on occasion. But we saw it through the rough years of the Buccaneers during the 2010s when the pass rush wasn't getting there. It didn't matter how good your corners were. It didn't matter how good your safeties were. They were left on an island and they were getting beat because the quarterback just had way too long in the pocket, undisturbed, to be able to find an opening in zone coverage to allow his wide receiver or his tight end to get open in man coverage. It was a huge problem. So what you're going to see now is Joe Tryon-Shoyinka taking on a combination of a lot of different jobs, whether that's coming off the edge, whether that's lining up with his hand in the dirt, going out to cover the flat in pass coverage. He is no longer a true edge rusher, which is what he was drafted to be. Now, is there a possibility that with Todd Bowles saying he knows how to use JTS now, and JTS being one of these chess pieces, that he breaks out this year in the way that Todd Bowles wants to utilize him? Absolutely. That possibility is wide open. However, the Bucs aren't going to pick up his option in hopes that he does. It's a calculated risk to not guarantee that kind of money if they're going to get the same production that they have the first 3 years. Then, if he does break out, you would think that JTS and his agent had the negotiating leverage to parlay that into a big extension, but the Bucs would actually hold all of the cards there too. They can simply point out that it took 4 years to finally find a way to utilize him in the defense for him to be able to put up bigger numbers than he did those first 3 seasons, whatever those numbers may be, and that Bowles had to change the way that he utilized JTS in that defense in order to achieve that breakout. Therefore, his best course of success is to actually stay in Tampa and stay with Todd Bowles and build on that rather than go somewhere else for more money in the high likelihood that he would be cut after a year because he didn't live up to the big contract. This was the smart move and the right move for the Buccaneers because chances are JTS would wind up overpaid next season on the option year based off of his production. Worst case scenario is that if he has a career year, which is great for the Bucs in 2024, and he leaves to go somewhere else, which I think a lot of Bucs fans really wouldn't be all that upset about, and the Bucs would just dip right back into the edge rusher pool in next year's draft, which they're probably planning on doing anyway. But the worst case scenario is that he has a career year and then he leaves. But as I mentioned, having that career year for the Buccaneers in 2024 certainly helps against a very difficult schedule in a year when they're trying to win the division for a 4th year in a row, make the playoffs for a 5th year in a row. That kind of production will certainly help them reach those goals. But at the end of the day, it should not have been a surprise by any means that JTS didn't have his extension picked up and that the Bucs are going to take that risk and take that gamble that if he does live up to what they expected of him when they made him a first-round draft pick years ago, then they may pay a little bit more or they may let him go ahead and walk. But this was ultimately the correct course of action for the Buccaneers when addressing that 5th-year option. All of the Buccaneers' offensive undrafted free agents and the ones that you should be keeping an eye on, that is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. You can get unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. There's cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robotic pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything that you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. Everydayers, make sure you are coming back tomorrow. Going to put a tidy nice little bow on this week. Over the weekend, I will be starting to dive in to my film study. We're going to start things off with Graham Barton, so you're not going to want to miss that. But in the meantime, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We talked about some of the undrafted free agents on yesterday's show with Evan Klosky of 10 Tampa Bay. If you didn't see that, make sure you go back, watch it on YouTube, check it out on your podcast platform. But I wanted to run down the full list of UDFAs for you here and talk about some of the guys that I am really interested to see. And we're going to start with the offensive side of the ball. And here's who the Bucs are bringing in. Mind you, in these lists, I have included the tryout invites included in here. So on the offensive side of the ball, you have quarterbacks Jeremy Musa, Michael Hyers, and Zach Annexstad. Running backs Anthony Grant, DJ Williams. Wide receivers Latrell Jones, Cameron Johnson, Zach Mathis, Tanner New. Shout out to Tanner New from Mason, Ohio. Not very far from where I am right now. Really excited that he's getting an opportunity with the Buccaneers. Whether or not he makes it onto an NFL roster or a practice squad is yet to be seen, but always cool to see a local kid get that opportunity. So shout out to Tanner. Offensive linemen, you have Xavier Delgado, Avery Jones, Jack Freeman, and then tight end John Deedle. So those are the guys on the offensive side of the ball that the Bucs have brought in as undrafted free agents. And the ones that pop out to me are first running back DJ Williams. And I think some of you have referenced DJ Williams in the YouTube comment sections over the course of the last couple episodes. Williams played last year for Arizona. He also played for Florida State and Auburn. And the reason that he pops out to me is his size. I have harped on this for months, and I harped on it again after the Bucs took Bucky Irving out of Oregon in the 4th round. But Williams has that size that could really come in handy. He's 6 foot, 210 pounds, and there is your big short yardage running back. He had 372 yards and 5 touchdowns on 85 carries last season with the Wildcats. In 2022, he had 376 yards and 3 touchdowns on 60 rushes. That's 6.3 yards per carry. Williams did very little receiving in his 2 years at Arizona, 6 receptions for 67 yards over the 2 years, but he's a Lake Placid kid, so he's a local and could emerge as the short yardage threat that the Buccaneers need. Now, they're probably banking on the push from the offensive line being much better than it was last year with the upgrades that they have tried to make there. But you're still talking about 3 relatively small running backs in Rachaad White, Bucky Irving, and Chase Edmonds. Bringing Williams in to a game to get a yard or two or punch it in from the goal line gives the Bucs something that has been sorely lacking over the course of the last 2 years. And I'm not saying that he's going to make the team, but if he convert on those types of situations in mini camps, OTAs, into training camps, opportunities in preseason, he might find his way onto the roster as that kind of weapon, essentially, that situational running back that the Bucs don't have. Sean Tucker does not bring that kind of size and power. Patrick Laird does not bring that kind of size and power. So Williams can absolutely win that job. Now, the other running back, Anthony Grant, is the same kind of weight, 5'11", 200 pounds. He's another bowling ball of a runner. He had nearly 1,000 yards in 2022 in Nebraska before seeing less than half of the carries that he got in 2022 in the 2023 season, only racked up 413 yards. Now, last year, Grant was basically part of a 3-headed committee at running back, whereas in 2022, he was the lone productive running back. So he dropped from 218 carries in 2022 to 104 in 2023, but he can get the job done. I think between these two running backs, I would give the edge to DJ Williams, but both have an opportunity to win some reps and possibly overtake Laird or Tucker in that running back room. And then the last guy that I want to kind of highlight here is wide receiver Latrell Jones, 6'2" out of Southern Miss, and he ran a 4.45 40-yard dash. What intrigues me is that he's still really, really raw, but he showed a ton of talent in his limited college experience. He only played at Southern Miss for 2 years, and he went from 10 receptions for 124 yards in 2022 to 36 receptions for 498 yards and 3 touchdowns last year. He's a converted cornerback with really impressive speed and quickness, and I think he might be a player that earns his way onto the roster thanks to special teams. With the new kickoff rules, the Bucs are going to look for help there, but even more, Jones could work his way onto this team as a gunner on punt team. With his speed, his background as a corner, he can tackle pretty well, and it makes for a really interesting player to watch in training camp. So those are the 3 guys that I'm really kind of keying in on. And now, obviously, again, and I'm going to put this graphic up for those of you watching on YouTube one more time. Obviously, you have the offensive lineman where there's going to be battling going on for that starting left guard spot. I don't think Xavier Delgado, Avery Jones, or Jack Freeman are going to be able to compete for that. However, the Bucs are still going to look for quality depth, or you're looking at guys that could wind up on the practice squad. I think John Deedle is a long shot to make this roster. The quarterbacks, those are going to be camp arms. Their quarterbacks are pretty much locked, loaded, ready to go. You're not going to see any of those guys really make the team. These are simply rookie mini camp arms, probably not even training camp arms. And then the wide receivers, you have your wide receiver 3 now in Jalen McMillan. You have Mike and Chris, obviously. Then you have Devin Tompkins. You have Raheem Jarrett. You have you have your allotment there of wide receivers. So really the way that somebody is going to find their way on this team is what I laid out for Latrell Jones. It's going to be on special teams. It's going to be the potential of being a kick returner or a punt returner, because the Bucs have been sorely lacking in that department as well. With the changing of the rules, you're going to look for someone with a little more quickness and a little bit better vision than what they've gotten out of Trey Palmer and Devin Tompkins in those situations. So that's the way I kind of look at this offensive side of the ball in terms of undrafted free agency. But what about the defensive side of the ball? There's a couple of guys that I think are going to find their way onto this Buccaneers roster. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. The Boston Celtics are still the favorites to win the NBA Finals at plus 130, followed by the defending champion Denver Nuggets at plus 260, then the Minnesota Timberwolves at plus 850 in third place there. So looking at it as a 2-team race between the Boston Celtics and the Denver Nuggets right now. In the race for the greatest trophy in all of sports, the Carolina Hurricanes are the favorites to hoist Lord Stanley's Cup at plus 390, followed by the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers at plus 500 each. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Wrapping things up here on a Thursday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And there are some defensive undrafted free agents that really jump out to me. But here is who the Bucs are bringing in on that side of the ball. Your linebackers, you have Kalen DeLoach, Antonio Greer, Sean Peterson, Julius Wilderson. Your defensive backs, these are corners and safeties, Tyreek Funderburk, Chris McDonald, Rashad Wisdom, Marcus Banks, Don Chapman. Your defensive tackles, you have Judge Culpepper, Damon Williams, Mayan Ahanatu, Mike Thompson, and then your edge rusher, Daniel Griesiak. Those are your defensive undrafted free agents. And again, I mentioned him yesterday with Evan, but I think Kalen DeLoach, the linebacker out of Florida State, is an interesting player here. The Bucs did not address linebacker in the draft, and DeLoach was one of, if not the first, UDFA that they grabbed. 4.47 40 time at 6 foot, 210 pounds, jumps out immediately, especially since we know that Todd Bowles likes his linebackers to be fast. The biggest knock on DeLoach was his poor play in pass coverage, but he has sideline to sideline speed and a knack for finding his way to the football as fast as possible. The Bucs have a battle for the other inside linebacker spot opposite Levante David. I think KJ Britt has the advantage. He has the leg up there over Servassier Dennis and JJ Russell, but the Bucs still need depth after Devin White left in free agency. Of the linebackers that they are bringing in, I think DeLoach has the best chance of working his way onto the roster, coming out of a Florida State program where they produce some really solid linebackers, and a lot of them are on the undersized side. So I think DeLoach is definitely a guy that you're going to want to keep an eye on during rookie minicamp, during OTAs, into training camp. We'll see if he makes it that far, but I definitely give him the advantage over the other undrafted linebackers coming in. And of course, I have to mention the legacy invites. Judge Culpepper and Mayan Ahanatu. Judge Culpepper, the son of Brad Culpepper, former Buccaneer, and then Mayan Ahanatu, the son of Chidi Ahanatu, former Buccaneer. Now, I think Ahanatu is a long shot, and I mean a very long shot to make the roster, but I have to say that it's really cool that he got an invite as a tryout player to Bucs rookie minicamp. Now, Culpepper, on the other hand, was given some significant money, and I think he's got a legitimate shot at making this roster as a depth piece along the defensive line. 6'4", 300 pounds. Culpepper played 2 years at Penn State and then transferred to the University of Toledo. He racked up 38 tackles, 10.5 tackles for loss, and 9 sacks last season for the Rockets. And this is one of those nasty dudes that you want to have in the trenches. And with the depth along the defensive line being at a premium, it doesn't hurt to have someone that loves the game the way that Culpepper does, or that really busts his butt to improve each and every day. And that's what coaches are going to look for in these guys. Obviously, they're looking for football talent. They're looking for football IQ, but they're also looking for who wants this, who is fighting to get onto this roster, who is coachable, who is improving. And again, they gave Culpepper some solid money as a priority free agent. Think back to Sean Tucker last year at running back, who they gave some significant money to as a priority free agent. He ended up being on the roster, not as effective as a lot of us thought or hoped he would have been, but giving him that kind of money as an undrafted free agent means that they already like what they saw. They have a spot in mind for him. He still has to go out there and earn it, though. And then one other player that I find to be really interesting, and Evan mentioned him briefly on yesterday's episode, but it's Tyreek Funderburk from Appalachian State. 4 interceptions and 2 touchdowns last season to go along with 46 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, and a half of a sack. He was projected as a 6th to 7th rounder, ended up going undrafted. Here's where it starts to get interesting. Funderburk is a former track star, and he has a knack for getting to the football. And absolutely, he's a project. Most undrafted free agents, most late round guys are projects to some extent. But with the kind of speed that he has, he can find his way onto this team as a special teamer while the coaching staff works with him on techniques and angles and how to better improve himself in coverage versus what he did at App State. You know, you would want to utilize him in a way that he helps the team. Again, I go back to talking about the wide receiver out of Eastern Michigan, Latrell Jones, finding his way onto the team as a special teamer because of his ability to tackle, because of that speed. It's the same thing here with Funderburk. You can utilize him as a gunner. You could utilize him potentially as a returner. Meanwhile, during practice, during installations, you can work with him to build him up as a viable depth piece at cornerback. We saw how often Buccaneers corners got injured last season. Carlton Davis missed significant time. Jamel Dean missed significant time. I believe Christian Izien missed a game or two last year. They brought in Bryce Hall. They brought in Tavier Thomas. They drafted Tyke Smith. But you still have Jamel Dean, who has an injury history issue. You have Zion McCollum. Maybe he regresses. You're hoping he takes a step forward. Maybe he regresses. You can't have too many of these guys. So if you can utilize Funderburk in special teams while building him up as a viable corner that you can trust to put out there on the field, his ability and willingness on special teams is what may help him find his way onto the roster. So some interesting defensive players there. And again, maybe Kalen DeLoach doesn't make the team. You still have Antonio Greer. You still have Sean Peterson. You still have Julius Wilderson out there competing to be a depth piece at linebacker. I find it very interesting that they only brought in one edge guy as an undrafted free agent. I don't know if the Bucs feel that with the addition of Braswell and the addition of Randy Gregory, you still have JTS, you still have Yaya Diaby, you have Anthony Nelson, you have Jose Ramirez, who was drafted last year, dealt with a lot of injuries, wasn't able to make it on the field. They're expecting big things out of him. Maybe they feel that edge rusher is kind of set, but Daniel Griesiak is an interesting addition there. He might end up showing out and showing off. Maybe Jose Ramirez doesn't live up to what the Bucs believed he could be. I know they're very interested to see him on the field installed in this defense, but it was still interesting to me that you didn't get the edge rusher in the first round in the draft. Allegedly, they were going for Marshawn Nealon, who was taken one pick ahead of them. They pivoted seamlessly to Chris Braswell out of Alabama to come in and be that guy. I think Braswell's ceiling is incredibly high, given how productive he was in his limited capacity on that defense behind some of those other great Alabama players. But it seems to me that if you're only going to bring in one edge rusher as an undrafted free agent, you could feel pretty confident in that room and the abilities that you already have on the team. Of course, there are still some NFL free agents floating out there. You could see a signing, but at this point, I think the Bucs are pretty confident in what they have coming into the building. Probably going to reassess after rookie minicamp, after OTAs. I talk about that second wave of free agency that comes after the NFL draft. It's not an immediate thing. It's something that kind of teams want to see what they have on the field. They want to start to get a feel for these players, assess, and then you start to see some of those signings happening late May, early June, even into the first week and a half, 2 weeks of training camp. So still the potential that the Bucs end up adding somebody else if one of these players or two of these players don't pan out the way that they thought they would. That is going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bucs. Again, check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Follow on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to sign up there and make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.